penthouse view of Manhattan was breathtaking, but inside the air was so heavy with silence, it felt like drowning. Elias watched his wife laugh at a text message, a soft, intimate sound she hadn't given him in years, while his masterpiece sat drying in the corner, invisible to her. It wasn't just a painting she was about to destroy. It was the last tether keeping him from seeing the truth about the man she was meeting after work. If you understand how silence can be louder than screaming, and how the things we break sometimes define who we become, stay with me for this story. The rain in Manhattan didn't wash things clean. It just made the city look like a blurred photograph, smearing the lights of the skyscrapers into long, weeping streaks against the glass. Elias stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the 42nd floor apartment, a mug of cold coffee in his hand. The reflection staring back at him was thin, pale, and exhausted. Behind him, the apartment was a masterpiece of interior design. Italian leather sofas, marble countertops, minimalist sculptures. But it felt less like a home and more like a showroom where he wasn't allowed to touch anything. He turned his gaze to the easel in the corner of the living room. It was the only chaotic element in the pristine space. The canvas, 6 feet tall, was a tempest of deep blues, violent charcoals, and a single jagged line of crimson running down the center. He called it the fracture. It was everything he couldn't say out loud. The sound of the front door unlocking cut through the silence like a gunshot. Elias's stomach tightened. It was 9:45 p.m. Julianne was early. Usually the mergers and client dinners kept her out until past 11. Elias? Her voice carried that familiar edge of impatience, the tone of a CEO addressing an underperforming intern. "In here," he said, his voice raspy from a day of not speaking to a single soul. Julianne walked in, bringing the scent of the city and something else with her, a heavy, musky cologne that definitely wasn't hers. She tossed her Hermes bag onto the sofa, narrowly missing a tube of paint Elias had left on the side table. She was beautiful, terrifyingly so, with her sharp bob cut and a tailored suit that cost more than Elias had made in the last 3 years combined. "It smells like turpentine in here," she said, wrinkling her nose. She didn't look at him. She walked straight to the wine fridge. "I was working," Elias said gently. "How was the meeting with the partners?" Julianne poured a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, her back to him. "Fine. Stressful. Mark is demanding, as always." At the mention of Mark, Elias felt a prickle of heat behind his eyes. Mark, the senior partner. The man who texted Julianne at 2 a.m. about briefs that required smiling emojis. "You've been mentioning Mark a lot lately," Elias ventured, trying to keep his voice steady. Julianne spun around, her eyes flashing cold fire. "Don't start, Elias. I've been working 12-hour days to pay the mortgage on this place, to pay for your supplies." She gestured vaguely at the easel with her wine glass, a splash of liquid nearly hitting the floor. "I don't have the energy for your insecurity. It's not insecurity if it's real. Jules." "Don't call me that," she snapped. Her phone buzzed on the marble island. The screen lit up. Elias was closer to it than she was. He looked down. Sender. Mark message. "The hotel was amazing. Miss you already. Don't let him bore you tonight." The world seemed to stop spinning. The rain against the window went silent. Elias stared at the words, feeling a strange, detached numbness spreading through his chest. It wasn't the surprise that hurt. It was the confirmation. The absolute lack of respect. Julianne saw his eyes on the phone. She didn't panic. She didn't rush to grab it. She just took a sip of her wine, her expression hardening into something resembling steel. "Well," she said, her voice devoid of any guilt, "I suppose you were going to find out eventually. Honestly, Elias, it's a relief." Elias looked up from the screen to his wife. "A relief? That we can stop pretending," she said, setting the glass down with a sharp clink. "Stop pretending that this works, that you work." She walked toward him, her heels clicking on the hardwood. "I need a partner, Elias. Someone who builds empires, not someone who plays with paint and feels sorry for himself all day." "I am building something," Elias whispered, stepping back toward his canvas as if to protect it. "This painting, it's the best work I've ever done. The gallery in Soho is interested." "Interested?" Julianne laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. They're interested because I bought a piece from them last year. It's pity, Elias. It's all pity. She stood in front of the canvas now, analyzing it with a sneer. And this? The fracture? It's just a mess. Dark, depressing, and useless. Just like this marriage. She reached out, her hand hovering over the drying oil paint. Don't touch it, Elias warned, his voice shaking for the first time. Julianne looked at him, then back at the painting. A wicked glint appeared in her eyes, the look of a person who wanted to hurt something just to prove they could. Or what? She challenged. What are you going to do, Elias? Leave. With whose money? She grabbed the palette knife sitting on the stool. Julianne, no. You want to see a fracture? She whispered, and then she slashed. The sound was worse than the sight. It was a dry, rasping scream of fabric giving way, a noise that seemed to vibrate in Elias's teeth. Julianne didn't stop at one slash. She dragged the palette knife down the center of the canvas, severing the crimson line he had spent 3 weeks perfecting. Then she slashed horizontally, effectively beheading the abstract form. Elias stood rooted to the spot. His hands hung limp at his sides. He didn't lunge to stop her. It was too late for that. He simply watched, a cold numbness spreading from his chest to his fingertips, anesthetizing him against the violence. Julianne was breathing hard, her chest heaving beneath the silk of her blouse. She stepped back, the knife dangling loosely in her grip, a smudge of dark blue oil paint staining her manicured thumb. She looked at the ruined canvas, then at Elias, waiting for the explosion. She wanted him to scream. She wanted a fight that would justify her betrayal, something to make him the villain in her narrative. But Elias remained silent. The apartment was quiet again, save for the hum of the wine fridge and the relentless drumming of rain against the glass. There, Julianne said, her voice trembling slightly, not with regret, but with adrenaline. Now you can stop obsessing over it. Maybe now you'll get a real job. Elias looked at the ribbons of canvas hanging like flayed skin. The painting was dead, but strangely, so was the heavy weight of anxiety that had sat on his shoulders for years. The fear of losing her was gone, because the woman standing there, eyes cold, lips curled in distaste, was a stranger. You're right, Elias said softly. Julianne blinked, caught off guard. What? I said you're right. It's done. He turned his back on her and walked down the hallway to the master bedroom. He could hear her footsteps following him, the click of her heels agitated and sharp. Where are you going? I'm not finished talking to you, Elias. He ignored her. In the bedroom, he pulled his old leather duffel bag from the top of the closet. He didn't pack much. Just jeans, a few sweaters, his sketchbook, and the toiletries from the bathroom. He didn't touch the suits she had bought him for her company galas. He didn't take the watch she gave him for their anniversary. Those things belonged to the husband she had created, not to him. You're being dramatic, she scoffed from the doorway, leaning against the frame with her arms crossed. Where are you going to go? You have $40 in your checking account. You'll be back before morning. Elias zipped the bag shut. The sound was final, like a period at the end of a sentence. He slung the strap over his shoulder and walked past her, careful not to let his arm brush against hers. Back in the living room, he stopped in front of the easel. He crouched down and began to carefully remove the tattered strips of canvas from the wooden frame. The wet paint smeared onto his hands, marking him. What are you doing? Julianne asked, her voice rising in genuine confusion. It's trash, Elias. Leave it. It's mine, he said. He rolled the destroyed pieces of the fracture into a bundle and tucked it under his arm. Then he looked at his left hand. The platinum band felt heavy, a shackle of white gold. He slid it off. The skin underneath was pale, a ghost of the commitment he had kept while she was in hotel rooms with Mark. He placed the ring on the cold marble of the kitchen island, right next to her half-empty glass of wine. Goodbye, Julianne. Elias, stop, she snapped, a flicker of panic finally entering her tone as he reached the front door. Don't walk out that door. If you leave now, don't think you're coming back to this life. Elias opened the heavy door. The hallway air was cool and smelled of industrial cleaner. He looked back at her one last time. She looked small in the vast, expensive apartment, surrounded by things that couldn't love her back. I know, he said. The door clicked shut, severing the light from the room. Elias walked toward the elevator, the ruined painting under his arm, walking away from the skyline and into the dark. 2 years later, the silence was different. It wasn't the pressurized, air-conditioned vacuum of a Manhattan penthouse. It was the roar of the Pacific Ocean crashing against the basalt cliffs of Oregon. Elias sat on the porch of his rented cabin, watching the gray fog roll in through the Douglas firs. His hands were different now, too. The soft, manicured fingers of the artist who sipped wine in galleries were gone. In their place were calluses, small cuts from woodworking, and nails permanently stained with soil. He worked days at a local lumberyard, stacking cedar and fixing fences for neighbors who knew him only as Eli, the quiet guy from out east. He hadn't painted a single stroke since the night he walked out. The smell of turpentine, once his perfume, now made him nauseous. Inside the cabin, the bundle of destroyed canvas sat in the corner of the living room like an unexploded bomb. He had moved it 3 times, from the car to a motel to an apartment, and finally here. He never opened it. It was a tomb of his former life. It was a Tuesday evening when a ceramic bowl slipped from his soapy hands while washing dishes. It hit the floor and shattered into 4 distinct jagged pieces. Elias knelt to pick them up. He held the shards, ready to toss them into the trash bin, but he paused. He remembered a book he had read in college about kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with lacquer dusted with powdered gold. The philosophy was simple. The break is part of the object's history, not something to disguise. The flaw is where the value lies. He looked at the bowl. Then slowly, he looked at the corner of the room where the canvas lay. The realization hit him not like a bolt of lightning, but like the slow rising of the tide. It was inevitable. Elias abandoned the dishes. He went to his tool shed and retrieved a container of clear epoxy resin and a small vial of gold mica powder he used for wood inlays. His heart hammered against his ribs, a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. He brought the bundle of canvas to the center of the rough-hewn wooden table. His hands shook as he untied the twine. The canvas unrolled, revealing the violence of that night. The slashes were still sharp, the edges frayed, the image of the dark blue storm severed by Julianne's rage. It looked like a corpse. Elias took a deep breath, smelling the faint old oil paint. He didn't try to push the edges back together perfectly. He didn't try to hide the gap. He mixed the resin and the gold powder until it looked like liquid sunlight. With a small brush, he began to work. He wasn't painting a new picture. He was performing surgery on the old one. He filled the jagged tiers with the gold mixture. Where the canvas was completely separated, he used the gold resin to bridge the gap, creating a vein of shimmering light that connected the broken islands of color. He worked through the night. The rain battered the roof, but Elias didn't hear it. He was in a trance. He was taking the ugliest moment of his life, the moment his wife looked at him with pure contempt, and filling it with gold. By the time the sun bleached the gray sky into a pale morning, the painting was no longer the fracture. The slash wasn't a wound anymore. It was a river of light running through the darkness. It was stronger at the broken places. Elias stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead. Ideally, he should have felt sad, but as he looked at the resurrected canvas, he felt a strange, fierce power. He wasn't just fixing a painting. He was rewriting the ending of the story Julianne thought she had finished. The one painting turned into 5, then 12. The cabin, once smelling of damp pine and wood smoke, now carried the sharp, chemical tang of resin and the metallic dust of gold. Elias didn't just repair old works anymore. He began to create pristine, beautiful abstracts, soft washes of color that represented peace, only to take a knife to them. He destroyed his own perfection intentionally, controlling the break so he could heal it with the gold veins. It became a ritual, a theology. He called the series Kintsugi. 6 months after repairing the first canvas, Elias drove his battered pickup truck into Portland. In the back, wrapped carefully in blankets, were 3 of his pieces. He wasn't looking for fame. He was looking for rent money. The lumber yard hours had been cut, and the winter was coming. He stopped at a small gallery in the Pearl District called the Gray Slate. It wasn't high-end, but it had a reputation for showing raw, industrial art. The owner, a woman named Clara with silver hair and thick-rimmed glasses, watched him unwrap the largest piece. It was the original, the one Julianne had slashed. The deep blues were now bisected by a lightning bolt of raised, shimmering gold resin. Clara stood in silence for a long time. She took off her glasses, cleaned them, and put them back on, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "It's violent," she whispered, stepping closer, "but it's incredibly tender. Who is the artist?" "I am," Elias said, his voice low. He felt exposed, standing there in his flannel shirt and work boots. "I can sell this," Clara said, her tone shifting from appreciation to business. "I can sell all of them. What's your name? I'll need a bio, a headshot." "No," Elias cut in. "No photos, no bio, and no name." Clara frowned. "Collectors like a story, honey. They buy the artist, not just the art." "The story is on the canvas," Elias said firmly. "If you want them, sign them as E.T. That's it. If that doesn't work, I'll take them back home." Clara looked at the painting again, mesmerized by the way the gallery lights caught the gold ridge. She sighed. "Fine. E.T. it is. But you're making my job harder." She didn't know she was wrong. The anonymity didn't make it harder. It made it a phenomenon. The pieces sold within a week, then the next batch. The mystery of the gold artist from the Pacific Northwest began to ripple outward. It started with local blogs, then moved to art forums. People speculated on the trauma behind the slashes. Was it war? Was it a survivor of an accident? The silence Elias maintained only amplified the noise around him. 3 months later, the phone in the cabin rang. It was Clara. "Are you sitting down?" she asked. Elias wiped his hands on a rag, sitting on the edge of his unmade bed. "I'm here. I had a visitor today, a curator. He was scouting for a collective exhibition on modern resilience." Elias felt a cold dread pool in his stomach. "Where is the exhibition, Clara?" "It's a major show, Elias. The biggest of the year." She paused, her voice trembling with excitement. "It's at the Met, in New York." New York. The words hung in the air like smoke. "He wants the fracture as the centerpiece," Clara continued. "He's offering an advance that would pay your rent for the next 5 years. But you have to agree to send it." Elias looked out the window. The rain was falling again, just like that night. Sending the painting back to New York felt like sending a letter to a ghost. It was the city that had broken him, but perhaps it was the only place where the repair could truly be tested. "Send it," Elias whispered. Manhattan had not changed, but the view from the corner office on the 55th floor made the city look like a circuit board, cold, logical, and electric. Julianne Thorne placed her fountain pen on the mahogany desk, aligning it perfectly with the edge of her legal pad. She was a named partner now: Thorne, Sterling, and Vance. It was everything she had screamed for during those late-night arguments with Elias. She had the title, the 7-figure salary, and the respect of the most ruthless litigators in the state. She also had dinner alone 5 nights a week. There was a light knock on the glass door. It was Mark. He didn't come inside. He just leaned against the frame, holding a file. He looked older, his charm beginning to curdle into something sleazy around the edges. "Big night tonight?" Mark asked, flashing the smile that had once convinced her to wreck her home. "Just the Met Gala," Julianne said, not looking up from her paperwork. "Client maintenance." "Right, have fun. I'm taking Jessica to the Hamptons for the weekend. Don't wait up." Jessica was the new associate. She was 24, eager, and looked at Mark the way Julianne had 3 years ago. Julianne felt nothing. No jealousy, no anger, just a dull, metallic taste of regret. The affair with Mark had lasted exactly 6 months after Elias left. Once the thrill of the secret was gone, Mark became just another demanding man who checked his watch while she was talking. "Goodbye, Mark," she said. He left without a backward glance. Julianne swiveled her chair to face the window. She had won. That was the narrative she told her therapist. She had shed the dead weight of a struggling artist husband and ascended to the top of her field. But the victory felt like swallowing ash. She went home early to prepare. The penthouse was different now. She had hired a decorator to purge it of any memory of Elias. The spot where his easel had stood was now occupied by a harsh, geometric steel sculpture that cost $40,000. It was impressive. It was also ugly. On her vanity sat the invitation, The Metropolitan Museum of Art requests the pleasure of your company for the opening of Resilience, Beauty and the Broken. It was the social event of the season. Everyone who was anyone would be there. Julianne stared at her reflection in the mirror as she fastened her diamond earrings. The woman staring back was impeccable. Skin smoothed by expensive facials, eyes hardened by years of corporate warfare. But as she reached for her perfume, her hand paused. She remembered the smell of turpentine. For a brief, terrifying second, she missed the chaos. She missed the paint tubes left on the counter. She missed the way Elias used to look at her, not as a lawyer or a conquest, but as a muse. She had destroyed that look with a palette knife. She shook her head, physically dispelling the memory. She was Julianne Thorne. She didn't have regrets. She had learning experiences. She grabbed her clutch, smoothed the silk of her black gown, and walked out of the apartment. She left the lights on. She always left the lights on now. It was the only way to make the silence feel less heavy. The Metropolitan Museum of Art smelled of expensive perfume, old stone, and money. The gala was in full swing, a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns swirling under the high-vaulted ceilings. Julianne moved through the crowd with the practiced grace of a shark in a reef. She nodded to judges, exchanged air kisses with socialites, and accepted a flute of champagne from a passing waiter without breaking her stride. She was bored. This was her world, yes, but tonight it felt suffocatingly shallow. "Have you seen the centerpiece yet?" Julianne paused. The voice belonged to Carter, a senior partner from a rival firm. He looked unusually flushed, his eyes wide with genuine artistic appreciation. A look Julianne hadn't seen on a lawyer's face in decades. "I just arrived," Julianne said coolly. "Is it worth the hype?" "It's disturbing," Carter said, struggling for the word. "And magnificent. The artist is anonymous. Goes by E.T. Nobody knows who he is, but the critics are calling it the most important work of the decade." E.T. The initials pecked at the back of Julianne's mind, but she dismissed it. Coincidence. Elias didn't paint anymore. He was probably working in a coffee shop in Ohio, or wherever failed dreamers went to die. She made her way toward the Temple of Dender, where the main exhibition was housed. The crowd here was thicker, hushed, pressing in toward a single wall. The lighting was dramatic, casting the rest of the room in shadow, while a single spotlight bathed the center canvas in a halo of white brilliance. Julianne used her elbows gently but firmly, carving a path to the front. She needed to see what had silenced a room full of narcissists. As she broke through the final line of people, the air left her lungs. The painting was massive, 7 feet tall, a storm of deep, violent blues and charcoal grays, swirling in a chaotic tempest. It was angry. It was familiar. But it was the scar that held her gaze, running down the center of the canvas and slashing horizontally across the middle, was a thick, raised vein of gold. It wasn't painted on, it was structural. The canvas had been physically ripped apart and then stitched back together with a resin that shimmered under the museum lights. The gold caught the light and threw it back at the audience, turning the destruction into a blinding focal point. Julianne's hand went to her mouth. The champagne glass tilted dangerously. She knew those blues. She knew the texture of the charcoal. She remembered the specific, sickening sound the palette knife had made when she dragged it through that exact spot. This was the fracture. But it wasn't the broken, pathetic thing she had left on the floor of her penthouse. It was regal. It was triumphant. The gold thread didn't hide the violence she had inflicted. It highlighted it. It announced to the world, "I was broken, and I am more beautiful because of it." She stepped closer, her legs feeling like water. She looked at the small white placard mounted on the wall next to the masterpiece. Title, Kintsugi No. 1, The Fracture, Artist, E.T. Medium, Oil, Canvas, Gold Dust, Resin, Price, Sold, $2,500,000, $2.5 million. Julianne stared at the number, then back at the gold scar. The irony crashed over her like a physical blow. In her attempt to destroy him, she had given him the very tool he needed to surpass her. She had tried to cut him down, and instead, she had carved him into a legend. For the first time in years, the composure of Julianne Thorne cracked. A single tear hot and humiliating, escaped her eye and tracked through her perfect foundation. She wasn't looking at a painting. She was looking at her own cruelty, immortalized in gold, hanging in the greatest museum in the world for everyone to admire. And the worst part was, it was beautiful. Julianne wiped the tear from her cheek with a furious, precise motion. She took a breath, rebuilding her composure layer by layer. The cold stare, the straight spine, the slight tilt of the chin. She turned away from the painting, needing to escape the golden accusation staring back at her. And then she saw him. He was standing near a marble pillar, holding a glass of sparkling water. He wasn't wearing the paint-splattered hoodies she remembered. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, the black fabric absorbing the gallery lights. His hair was shorter, groomed, touched with gray at the temples. He looked solid. He looked like a man who owned the space he occupied. He was watching her. He had been watching her the whole time. For a moment, Julianne thought she might faint. The noise of the gala faded into a dull roar. She expected him to look away, to show the old shame or the old eagerness to please her. But Elias didn't blink. His expression was unreadable. Not angry, not happy, just calm, terrifyingly calm. Julianne moved before she thought. She navigated through the crowd, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She stopped 2 feet away from him. "Elias," she breathed. "Hello, Julianne," he said. His voice was deeper than she remembered, stripped of the apologetic tone he used to have when asking for grocery money. She gestured vaguely toward the crowd, toward the painting behind her. You did this." "I did. It's sold," she said, falling back on the only language she knew how to speak fluently. "Commerce. 2.5 million. That's impressive. It covers the rent," Elias said, a faint, dry smile touching his lips. It was a joke, but he didn't laugh. Julianne felt a surge of irrational anger mixed with a desperate need to claim him. She stepped closer, invading his personal space, smelling the clean, woodsy scent of him. No turpentine, just cedar and rain. "I recognized it," she whispered, her voice dropping so the nearby donors wouldn't hear. "That's the fracture. That's the canvas She trailed off. "The canvas you destroyed," Elias finished for her. He said it without malice, stating it like a weather report. "I didn't destroy it," Julianne said, her eyes flashing. She needed to win this moment. She needed to be the architect of his success, not the villain of his story. "Look at it, Elias. It's a masterpiece. If I hadn't done that, if I hadn't pushed you, you would still be painting pretty mediocre pictures in my living room." She looked at him, waiting for him to agree, waiting for him to say, "Thank you, Julianne. You were right. You were always right." Elias looked at her, and for the first time she saw pity in his eyes. It hit her harder than hatred ever could. "Is that what you tell yourself?" he asked softly, "that you were the muse?" "I was the catalyst," she insisted, her voice trembling. "I made you." Elias swirled the water in his glass. He looked over her shoulder at the painting, then back at her. "No, Julianne," he said. "You just held the knife. I'm the one who bled, and I'm the one who learned how to stitch it back together." He took a step back, creating a physical distance that felt like an ocean. "I didn't paint that for you," he added, "and I didn't paint it to hurt you. I painted it to show that some things can be broken and still have value, even if the person who broke them doesn't see it." "Elias," she said, reaching out to touch his arm. He didn't flinch, but he didn't lean into her touch either. He simply looked at her hand on his sleeve as if it were a leaf that had fallen there. "I have to go," he said. "The curator's waiting." "Wait," she said, panic rising in her throat. "We need to talk. Let's get coffee. Or dinner. My treat." Elias looked at her one last time. It was a look of finality, of a book being closed and put back on the shelf. "I don't think so," he said. "I have a flight to catch in the morning. I'm going home." "Home," she echoed. "But New York is your home." "Not anymore," he said. He turned and walked away. He didn't look back. He didn't hesitate. He walked into the crowd of admirers who were waiting to meet the mysterious artist, leaving Julianne standing alone in her expensive dress, right next to the proof of her own cruelty. The gala ended as all things in New York eventually did. Not with a bang, but with the clatter of valet parking and the fading of adrenaline. Julianne stayed until the lights were dimmed in the Great Hall. She watched the cleaning crews move in, their buffers humming across the stone floors, erasing the scuff marks left by the city's elite. The painting, Kintsugi #1, was covered with a protective cloth, shrouded for the night. The gold vein was hidden, but Julianne could still see it in her mind. A bright, jagged line burning behind her eyelids. She took a cab home. She didn't call Mark. She didn't check her work email. When she entered the penthouse, the silence was different this time. It wasn't the angry silence of a waiting argument, nor the tense silence of a secret kept. It was a hollow silence, the kind found in museums after closing time. She kicked off her heels, leaving them where they fell on the expensive rug. She walked to the living room window, looking out at the skyline. The rain had stopped and the city glittered like a diamond necklace, cold, hard, and beautiful. She poured herself a glass of water. Her hand trembled, just slightly. She looked at the spot on the wall where the steel sculpture hung, the sharp, geometric piece she had bought to replace Elias's easel. It looked aggressive, unforgiving. For the first time, Julianne admitted the truth to the empty room. She hadn't just destroyed a canvas that night 3 years ago. She had taken a knife to the only person who had ever seen her softness, and in doing so, she had become exactly what she feared, a woman made of glass, perfect from the outside, but unable to hold anything warm without shattering. She had the money, she had the title, she had the view, but the gold, the resilience, the ability to heal and become stronger, belonged to Elias, and he had taken it with him. Miles away, at JFK Terminal 4, Elias sat near the gate, his bag resting between his feet. He watched the planes taxiing on the tarmac, their red and green lights blinking in the darkness. He felt tired, a bone-deep exhaustion that comes after running a marathon, but his chest felt light. He took out his phone. There were 17 notifications, emails from galleries in London, Berlin, and Tokyo, messages from critics. A missed call from an unknown number that he suspected was Julianne's office line. He didn't open them. Instead, he opened his photo gallery. He scrolled past the photos of the gala, past the photos of New York. He stopped on a picture he had taken a week ago from the porch of his cabin in Oregon. It was just the mist rolling over the fir trees, gray and quiet. He thought about the painting hanging in the Met. He thought about the scar running through it. People thought the gold was there to hide the damage, or to make it pretty. They were wrong. The gold was the structural integrity. It was the only thing holding the pieces together. He realized now that he didn't hate Julianne. Hate was too heavy a thing to carry on a flight. He felt a distant, quiet gratitude. She had broken him, yes, but if she hadn't, he never would have found out what he was made of. He never would have found the gold. The flight attendant picked up the microphone. Flight 2109 to Portland is now boarding all groups. Elias stood up. He picked up his bag. He didn't look back at the city skyline visible through the terminal windows. He didn't need to. He had already painted his goodbye. He walked down the jet bridge, moving toward the rain, toward the west, toward a life that was stitched together, imperfect and wholly his own.